On the morning of Friday, the 3rd of December 1926, Archie left Styles and went to stay with some friends for the weekend. Nancy Neal was also staying at this house for the weekend. Perhaps Agatha knew this, perhaps she didn't, we can't be sure. Nobody knows what Agatha was thinking late that dark winter evening. Rosalind, now 7 years old, was in bed. The Christies' 2 housemaids were in the kitchen. But we know this. At about 11 o'clock that evening, Agatha went out and drove away in her car. She did not return home that night. On Saturday morning, a woman arrived by taxi at the Hydro Hotel in Harrogate, Yorkshire. The Hydro was one of Harrogate's biggest and best hotels, near the center of the town. "Can I have a room, please?" the woman asked. She was carrying a small suitcase and she looked very tired. "Yes, of course," said the man behind the hotel desk. "There's a nice room on the first floor, room number 5. It has hot and cold water, and the cost is £7 for a week." "Thank you, that will be all right," said the woman. "What name, please?" asked the man. "Mrs. Teresa Neal," said the woman with the suitcase. Also on that cold Saturday morning in December, a 15-year-old boy was walking beside a lake called the Silent Pool. This was at a place called Newlands Corner, about 14 miles from Sunningdale. The boy's name was George Best. Suddenly George saw a car. It was off the road, down by the lake, but the lights were on. "That's strange," he thought. "Why is that car down there and why are the lights on?" And he went to have a better look. The car was empty, but the driver's door was open. George looked inside. He saw a coat and an open suitcase. Half out of the suitcase were 3 dresses, some shoes, and some papers with the name Mrs. Agatha Christie on them. George quickly went to find a policeman. The newspapers were soon full of the story, and Agatha's picture was on the front pages. Where was the detective story writer? Was she dead? Was she murdered? Did she kill herself? The Daily News wanted answers to these questions and said on December the 7th that it would give £100 to the first person with the answers. By the next weekend, hundreds of policemen and thousands of people were looking for her. "Did your wife ever talk about disappearing?" a Daily Mail reporter asked Archie. "Yes," said Archie. "She once told her sister, 'I could disappear any time I wanted to. I would plan it carefully and nobody would find me.' Perhaps this happened. Or perhaps she's ill and can't remember who she is." The police asked Archie lots of questions, watched his house, and followed him to his office. "They think I've murdered Agatha," he told a friend. The woman at the Hydro Hotel had breakfast in her room each morning, and sat quietly reading in the hotel sitting room in the afternoons. She said good morning and good afternoon to other people in the hotel, and seemed worried because there were no letters for her. But one of the chambermaids went to see Mrs. Taylor, the wife of the hotel manager. "Mrs. Neal looks like the woman in the Daily Mail picture," said the chambermaid. "You know the one, Agatha Christie." Mrs. Taylor spoke to her husband about it, but they decided to say nothing. They did not want any trouble at the hotel. But 2 more people at the Hydro Hotel were also looking carefully at Mrs. Teresa Neal. Bob Tappan and Bob Leeming played music in the hotel each evening, and both of them watched the quiet woman in the corner of the room, and began to think. "I'm sure that Neal woman is Agatha Christie," Bob Tappan said to his friend one evening. "I think you're right," Bob Leeming agreed. "What shall we do about it?" And the next day they went to the police. The police immediately told Agatha's husband, and Archie Christie arrived at the Hydro Hotel at 6:45 p.m. on Tuesday, the 14th of December. When his wife walked out of the sitting room, Archie saw her and went up to her. "Hello, Agatha," he said. She looked at him carefully but did not seem sure who he was. "Hello," she said. The hotel was soon full of newspaper reporters. Archie told them later, "I don't think that my wife knows who she is. She doesn't know me and she doesn't know where she is." He and Agatha left the hotel the next day. There were reporters everywhere. They followed the Christies to the railway station, trying to get pictures of the frightened Agatha, who was hiding her face behind her hands. She looked thin and her face was white. And in London, hundreds of people were waiting at King's Cross station for the train from Harrogate. Everyone wanted to see the woman of mystery and her husband. Their lives now seemed to be like something out of one of her detective stories. Archie helped the silent, frightened Agatha through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions at them and took pictures, but neither Archie nor Agatha said a word. And for the rest of her life, Agatha never again spoke about Harrogate, the Hydro Hotel, or Teresa Neal. But what really happened that night after she left Styles? Why did she leave her car? How did she get to Harrogate? Was always a mystery. It still is. During the first weeks of 1927, Agatha went to stay with Madge and her husband in Cheadle, near Manchester. Archie stayed at Styles, but he wanted to marry Nancy Neal, and he asked Agatha for a divorce. At first she would not agree, but at last she said yes, and they were divorced in April 1928. Rosalind lived with Agatha. "I don't want to use the name Christie again," Agatha told her publishers. "I will think of another name to use." "But you can't change it now," they said. "Your readers know Agatha Christie. That's why they buy your books. If you change your name, nobody will know who you are." In the end, Agatha agreed to keep the name Christie, but she was not happy about it. But William Collins was right. Thousands of people in England and America were reading Agatha's books now. Then, in the autumn of 1928, Agatha decided to visit the West Indies. Rosalind was at school, and Agatha wanted a holiday in the sun, so she got tickets for a ship to Jamaica. 2 days before she left England, Agatha went to dinner with some friends. During the evening she talked to some people who were just back from Baghdad in Iraq. Their names were Commander and Mrs. Howe. "People always say that Baghdad is a terrible place," said Mrs. Howe. "But we loved it." She went on talking about the city, and Agatha listened with great interest. She soon decided that she wanted to see Baghdad for herself. "How do you get there?" she said. "By sea?" "You can go by train," said Mrs. Howe. "On the Orient Express." "The Orient Express," said Agatha. "I've always wanted to ride on that famous train. I'll go to Baghdad, not the West Indies." The Howes were very helpful and wrote down the names of interesting places for Agatha to visit. "And you must go to UR," Commander Howe said. Next day, Agatha changed her tickets for the West Indies for tickets to Istanbul by the Orient Express, and then on across the desert to Baghdad. It was an exciting journey for her, traveling alone for the first time. And later it gave her the idea for another of her most famous books, Murder on the Orient Express. While she was staying in Baghdad, she remembered Commander Howe's words, "You must go to UR." Archaeology was something that interested Agatha very much, and Leonard Woolley, the archaeologist, and his wife were working at UR. Catherine Woolley was very happy to meet Agatha. "I love your books," she told Agatha. "I've just finished reading The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. It was wonderful." Agatha became the Woolley's special visitor. She loved UR and she loved watching the archaeologists. It was slow, tiring work and they had to dig very carefully. Sometimes they found nothing for hours and sometimes they found old pots or knives. It was always exciting when one of the workers found something that was thousands of years old. "You must come back again another year," Catherine Woolley said. So Agatha did. She went out in March 1930, the week before the Woolleys planned to come back to England. The plan was that Agatha could travel back with them through Syria and Greece. A young archaeologist called Max Malawan was working with the Woolleys. He was 25 years old and a quiet young man. "I've told Max to show you Najaf and Kerbala," Catherine Woolley told Agatha. "Najaf is the holy city of the dead, and Kerbala has a wonderful mosque. When we leave here and go to Baghdad, he'll take you there. You can see Nippur on the way." "Oh, but doesn't Max want to go to Baghdad with you?" said Agatha. "He will have friends to see there before he goes home to England." "Oh no," said Catherine. "Max will be pleased to take you." The young archaeologist was pleased to take Agatha. He liked her immediately and Agatha liked him. They talked and laughed and enjoyed every minute of their time together. They met the Woolleys in Baghdad and the four of them traveled to Greece together. But when they got to their hotel in Athens, there were 7 telegrams waiting for Agatha. They all said the same thing. Rosalind was ill. Agatha must come home quickly. "I'll go with you, Agatha," said Max. "Oh, thank you, Max," said Agatha. "But haven't you got plans too?" "I've changed my plans," said Max quietly. "I'm coming with you, Agatha." So they traveled home together. When they arrived, they found that Rosalind was much better, so that was one happy ending. Soon there was another. Agatha was 14 years older than Max, but during the journey home Max decided to ask her an important question. And when they were back in England, he asked Agatha to marry him. They were married on the 11th of September 1930 in Edinburgh, in Scotland. 1930 was also the year when Agatha's other famous detective first appeared, in The Murder at the Vicarage. Her name was Miss Jane Marple, a little old woman who lived in the quiet English village of St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple looked like somebody's grandmother, a nice kind woman who enjoyed cooking and gardening. But she also had very good eyes and ears. She saw, heard, and remembered everything: names, faces, the times of trains and buses, the color of a shirt, the sound of a door shutting. And she always found out the name of the murderer before the police did. Readers loved the Miss Marple stories, and she was soon as popular as Hercule Poirot. But was she a real person? Where did the idea for the character come from? Where? "I can never remember," Agatha always said. For the next 25 years, Agatha went with Max on all his archaeological journeys. She loved traveling, and those were the happiest years of her life. It was a good time for writing too. "It's nice and quiet," Agatha always said. "There's no telephone." And visiting these interesting places gave her ideas for some of her best books. Death on the Nile, Appointment with Death, Murder in Mesopotamia. They came to Baghdad. She was now one of the most popular detective story writers in the world. One of the many people who enjoyed her books was Queen Mary, the mother of the King of England. One day in 1946, Agatha had a letter from the British Broadcasting Corporation in London. "They want me to write a play for Queen Mary's 80th birthday," she told Max. "A play for the radio?" "Then you must do it," said Max. Agatha's play for radio was called Three Blind Mice. Later she wrote the play again for a London theatre. This time it was much longer and she gave it a new name, The Mousetrap. It is a very famous play. It opened in 1952, and has been in one or other of the London theatres ever since then. In 1997, 45 years later, people were still going to see the play. What? It's a very good murder mystery, of course, but there is another story about the mousetrap too. Every night, at the end of the play, one of the actors talks to the people in the theater, and says, "Please don't tell your friends who did the murder in this play. They must come to the theater and see the play themselves." And everybody keeps the secret of the murderer's name, and so more and more people go to see the play. In 1971, Queen Elizabeth made Agatha a Dame of the British Empire, a very high honor for a woman in Britain. But why was Agatha Christie so famous? Perhaps it is because she was a wonderful storyteller. She planned her murder mysteries very carefully, putting a clue here, a clue there. And they are clever clues, so it is not easy to guess the name of the murderer. Who did it? We want to know, and by the end of the book, everything falls tidily into place and we have the answer. And of course, the stories are not really about murder and death. They are puzzles with comfortable endings because it is pleasing to read that the detective always catches the criminal. For an hour or two we can escape from real life, which is often neither tidy nor comfortable. Agatha Christie died on the 12th of January 1976. During her life, she wrote 67 detective novels, 10 books of short stories, 13 plays, 6 novels that were not about crime, using the name Mary Westmacott, and 2 books about her life. Many films were made from her books. The most famous one is Murder on the Orient Express, made in 1974. Today, millions of her books, in more than 40 different languages, are still sold in every country of the world, from China to Nicaragua. Agatha Christie was, perhaps, the greatest detective story writer of all time, a woman of mystery both in books and in life.